Alright, so in this video I'm going to talk about the Ghost system and a little bit about my experience with it. This is not going to be an in-depth guide into the Ghost system and how to set it up and all that. There's a lot of videos already out there on the internet. Bardwell's made a bunch of videos, I think, already on the Ghost system. Range tests, all that kind of stuff. This video is not going to be about any of that stuff, and if you're looking for that, there's other videos that I could refer you to. If you have questions about that, let me know in the comments and I'll point you in the right direction. Now, I wasn't going to review the system at all because I wasn't offered to be sent this, but someone, a very generous subscriber, sent me his system and said, go ahead and try it out and make a video about it and let us know what you think about it. So this is what this video is about. So it's just basically, it's pretty kind of raw, off the cuff, my experience with the system, how it works, and mostly how I think it compares to, say, like the R9 system or the TBS Crossfire system. I think those are the two other ones that are out there currently that are, people are thinking about. And there's also the new one called ExpressLRS, and I'll talk a little bit about that as well, though that's pretty new. So, and then, right now, the full JR module is available. The Nano module, I believe, is coming out soon, and hopefully I'll get a chance to try that later on my Jumper T-Lite. But basically, I've been using this on my Jumper T12 Pro, and the power output in this one is a maximum, I believe, 350 milliwatts. So we'll talk about that in a little bit in more detail later and how it compares to Crossfire at 2 watts and what I think about that. But in terms of how the system works, the ecosystem, the way that you would update firmware, binding, that kind of thing, very similar in terms of ease of use to compared to the TBS Crossfire system. So there's a micro USB port here on the top. You do have to have the radio turned on and power to the module to do firmware updates. You do have to install the ImmersionRC application to do the firmware updates, and there's like a USB driver. It's pretty simple to do. Just follow the directions on the website. Install those two things, install the program, plugs into your computer, and it'll detect it, and then you can go ahead and update the firmware in here. And then the firmware that's on here will get updated on the receivers over the air. Binding is also pretty easy to do. You don't have to press the bind button the first time you do the binding. Basically, a fresh receiver out of the box, the first time you try to bind it, basically the first time you power it on, it'll automatically go into bind mode because it hasn't been bound with anything yet. So then all you have to do is power up the receiver and then go into your menu here and then go to the bind, basically hit bind and choose your protocol that you want to use and then hit bind, and it'll bind right away, and then it will update the receiver's firmware if it needs to update it, if it's like if it detects that's an older firmware. So it works very similarly to the way the Crossfire system works, and it's much, much better than the way the R9 system works, because you're always going to have correct firmware matching on the receiver and on the module, versus on R9, who knows what you're going to get, some random chaos, which is where all the problems come from on the R9 system. Now, regarding the protocols that are available here, so interestingly enough, the one that has the lowest latency, I think, is the SRXL2 protocol, but it doesn't have any options for LQ and RSSI like the other protocols. So I actually was flying this around and I was wondering, well, there's no RSSI anywhere, so it's kind of hard to tell what your signal strength is. And I did try to do sort of like my own, pseudo range test, just kind of fly as far as I feel comfortable flying away. Never got any like telemetry lost or any kind of warnings from the radio that I'm about to lose signal or anything like that. Never got a failsafe. So I know the range on this is pretty good. I've seen other videos on that. So I wasn't really trying to test the range. I just wanted to get an idea if the latency was going to increase at all as I flew further away. I didn't feel any different than Crossfire or R9. The latency was totally fine. But on some of these other protocols that you could possibly bind to, like S-Bus Inverse, S-Bus, you can see there's RXLQ and RSSI. You can put those on different channels, and then you can then put that onto your OSD. So if you want to see that, PWM doesn't have that. There's a Ghost protocol, also has the LQ and RSSI available on an aux channel. Now, what's interesting is that the Ghost protocol isn't supported yet unless you use a beta. I think it's like beta firmware from what is it? The upcoming beta flight 4, I believe, which isn't out yet. So yeah, well, I mean, it's newer. This protocol is not fully supported, so I wasn't able to test it or use it. And so this is kind of, Ghost isn't fully, I guess, out there, fully baked yet, because it's not fully supported in OpenTX and on Betaflight. So those things are going to have to, I guess, videos will come out later on how that actually works. Although, I think the latency is not going to be that much better than SRXL2. And quite frankly, unless you're a racer or someone that really needs that super low latency link, you're not going to really be able to tell much difference. I couldn't tell any difference between this or Crossfire or any other protocols out there. It just felt like it was a very low latency link, very good control in terms of that. Whether or not we'll see any benefits to the Ghost protocol later, that we'll have to see. I'm not sure yet. The receivers here are very tiny, and you can see I've already broke one of the receivers already here. I'll talk about that here in a second. So that is one of the nice things about the Ghost protocol or the Ghost system is the receivers are very small, and you can see I only have 3 wires connected. I don't have that 4th pad connected. That's for you. I guess you could use it to control smart audio video transmitters if you're on analog. This is actually DJI, so that's kind of irrelevant here. But that's one of the big differences between this one and the Crossfire system is that you can get away with just using one pad from a UART, and if you're using SRXL2, that'll be a TX pad, and if you're using one of the S-Bus protocols, that's going to use one of the RX pads on that UART, and you can choose either inverted or uninverted. So compared to Crossfire, you don't have to use a RX and a TX pad on a UART. So if you're in kind of one of the situations where you don't have enough UART pads to spare on your flight controllers, then you can go either RX or TX for your situation, depending on what you want to do. In my case, it was fine. I could choose either one or the other, and I decided to go with the TX pad and the SRXL2 protocol. So you can see here that the antenna has a little locking mechanism to prevent the antenna from popping off, which is good. You can also use heat shrink to do that. Now I did have a small crash, and I mean not really, more like a hard landing, and this isn't kind of my fault. It didn't really secure the antenna that great, and I think it would when it rolled around the ground, this got kind of caught on something, and it just yanked off the whole antenna here. I guess this right here is, I guess you would consider a weak point. So maybe if you want to prevent this little accident from happening, maybe put some heat shrink around the, basically, put it on over here before you attach it to the receiver, slide it up, and then wrap it around this little section here, give it a little bit of a strain relief, because I think it just bent. I think it bent like maybe this much, and it was just barely hanging on by a thread, and it was ready to pop off. So yeah, I'm not sure if having a T-style antenna is gonna make any difference in terms of your range. I'm wondering, maybe some of you guys would know. Let me know in the comments if I just remove the shielding here to the same whatever the 2.4 gigahertz frequency like this, could probably just make this into an antenna and use it as well. And I'm sure for my purposes, I don't fly super far away anyway. It's probably going to be fine. I don't know. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. So anyway, in terms of who this system is going to be for, in my opinion, if you're already a Crossfire user like I am, I don't see too much benefit to switching over to the Ghost system. It is on 2.4 gigahertz. You aren't going to get the same amount of penetration that you can on 900 megahertz. That much, I think everyone knows. If you disagree with that, let me know down in the comments. I would love to hear what you have to say about that. But from everything I've heard out on the internet already, 900 megahertz is better in terms of penetration. Now, the power output's limited to 350 milliwatts, I believe, on the Ghost system, versus if you get the full-size Crossfire, you can go up to 2 watts. So I think it's pretty much, at least in my opinion, 2 watts, you're going to get much more range on the Crossfire system. Now, people will say, well, you can use the smaller antennas on the Ghost system, right, like these, which are going to be better for micros and stuff. But, there are chopped down antennas for Crossfire as well. It does reduce your range if you use those. That much everyone knows. But you can bump up your power to 1 watt or 2 watts and to compensate for the smaller antenna. So that's why, in my opinion, if you're already a Crossfire user, it's probably not really worth it, because you can make up for the fact that the antenna is larger, just use a smaller antenna, and pretty much get the same performance or better than Ghost if you just go to higher output power. And that's pretty much the reason why I didn't even bother buying this system, because I knew that, from the videos I've seen, that there wasn't any real benefits for me, and I'm already pretty ingrained in the Crossfire system already, because I've got several Crossfire receivers, and you have to invest a lot of money to switch over all my quads and get extra receivers. I think the receivers are $30 plus the antenna, so they're the same price as a Crossfire receiver. I think even nowadays, Crossfire receivers are down to like $25, and if you can also buy them in bulk now. So in terms of the pricing advantage, is not much of a pricing advantage for receivers to switch over to Ghost. That's another reason why that if you're a Crossfire receiver, if you're a Crossfire user, I don't recommend switching over to Ghost. Now, if you don't have anything at all, and you're considering, well, I might want to use Ghost, or I might want to use Crossfire, you may want to consider using Ghost, because since you're starting out fresh, you're going to still be on 2.4 gigahertz overall anyway. And if you're just looking for a little bit more range, but not like massive amounts more range, then Ghost is probably going to be obviously a lot better than any of your existing 2.4 gigahertz systems like Frsky, FlySky, or Spectrum. So you may want to consider that. In terms of a cost advantage, there's not much of a cost advantage in terms, because the receivers are about the same price. I think the modules are maybe a little bit cheaper overall, if you consider the bulk deal where you get the module plus 3 receivers. But it also kind of depends on what kinds of things you're going to be buying in the future, because a lot of bind and fly quads, for example, already come with Crossfire, and as far as I know, as of today, the time of the recording of this video, I don't know of any bind and flies that come with Ghost pre-installed. So if you're looking to get pre-installed receivers, and as part of the ease of use, so you don't have to actually set up the receiver and install it yourself and all that, you're going to have there's going to be a more of an advantage there for going with Crossfire versus Ghost. Now, in terms of this versus the Ghost versus the R9 system, the Ghost is the ecosystem. Everything is much better, much easier to manage the receivers and updating the firmware and binding and all that's way better than what Frsky has. So if you're just trying to decide between Ghost and R9, I would say forget R9, just go with Ghost or Crossfire. Now, regarding ExpressLRS, it's really hard to say as to whether or not I can recommend that or not at this point, because it's too new. I do have the new Happy Model transmitter and receiver. I have those in hand already. That's going to be in a future video. It's coming out pretty soon. Testing that now. It is a 900 megahertz system similar to Crossfire, but it's because it's so new, the ecosystem, the way you have to do binding and updating all that is, in my opinion, it needs more work. At least right now. That's one of the reasons why I didn't make any videos on ExpressLRS, because you do have to do all this kind of stuff to update the firmware on the modules, on the receivers, and it's not easy. If it was easy, I would have made the videos already. And I was kind of wait for this stuff to mature a little bit more, have more development to occur. And now already manufacturers are making products for that. As you can see, Happy Miles making stuff. I think there's a couple other companies that are coming out with stuff that I'm going to have sent to me pretty soon, so I'll get to test it. But I'm looking at the way the firmware updates are happening and the way the binding works and all that. It still doesn't look like it's very mature yet. It's not that user friendly. And so it does require a more technical background, someone that's got a lot more experience with dealing with computers and firmware updates and like a little bit of a programming background. So I'll talk about that in the future video down the road, because I want to save all that information for later. For like right now, I'm thinking that if you're ready to buy right now, you can't decide. I would put ExpressLRS off to the side for now. Yeah, I think it's going to be cheaper for the receivers and stuff. I'm thinking some of these companies are going to provide them for maybe as low as $10 a receiver. So that could be a huge price advantage if you're willing to put in a lot more effort and work to get the system to work. So, well, I'll save all that for a future video. That's not really on topic for this one. But hopefully this will give you an idea whether or not Ghost is going to be right for you. Yeah, let me know if you have any comments or questions down below in the comment section, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one.